Good afternoon and welcome to the first ever PayProp users webinar. We've still got about a minute before we kick off just to allow the attendees to join. We will be going through some quite crunchy numbers, so I'll try and keep it as light-hearted as possible. But we're going to be going through what has actually we found happen, particularly over the first 90 days of lockdown. Don't worry about any of the information that is shown. What we will be doing is we will be providing a downloadable report, which will be sent to every attendee who registered. And what we'll also do is I will go through the questions and answers. Please feel free to submit throughout the course of this webinar. And if we don't get to them, they will all be answered. As these are all registered users on the PayProp platform, we can reach out to you after the webinar if there's any specific information that you'd like relevant to your agency. So I know we're all conscious of time, so I'm going to kick off promptly at 1. We are going to make this available as a resource as well. So under your resources page in PayProp, if you've not been able to attend or if you log in and you've missed the beginning, you will be able to access this under your resources so that you can watch it again at your leisure. So what I'd like to do is, when looking at this, we're kind of positioned as well to be asking the question, why are we bringing this information to our users? And so what I wanted to remind and cover would be the fact that why PayProp? Why did you engage with it in the first place? As a customer, what was it you came and what expertise was it that PayProp was able to deliver? We all know it's around that efficiency and the time saving, but it's also that the direct connection with the bank means that we have visibility on so much regarding the payment profiles, and that analysis can hopefully allow us not only to predict what may happen, but also looking at the impact of some finite dates that have already been set down as we move out of lockdown. And we're also able to operate, although we are PayProp UK and you're all UK customers, not to forget that we do operate in different places around the globe. So what I'm going to be hopefully doing is also bringing into context what we found within some of those global partners and how they're allowed, or if there is any learnings we can take from them that may be on the horizon for us as we come out of this lockdown situation. So almost the first thing I want to go into is that we've never expected to be here. As users, and some of you have been with us years, some of you have been with us only months or weeks, some actually come on during the lockdown pandemic. But little did we think at the start of the year that this is what our markets would look like, that these would be our major cities within the UK. So I want to actually look at some of the factors that we hear people talking about, particularly within our property sector. And we hear people campaigning for free rents. We hear people telling us that nobody's got jobs and where it's the market. But ultimately, as agents, we are expected to be the actual credible expert. When they come to us, I'm going to explain as well, within England, certainly, but what a responsibility we were given by that trust that was issued on the 12th of May by saying that we could open the following day. But also what that's done to our uncertainty. During lockdown, the government did a really good job in actually making us understand the importance of lockdown. But now as we move out of lockdown and the different devolved areas of the UK do it at a different speed, what is that doing for people's certainty? What is it doing for their feelings of vulnerability? And within this market, the way that we react, how are we got a responsibility, whether it be back to our tenants, to our landlords, or to our employees, to make sure that we're safe? I was recently on another webinar with a member as the head of the Guild, Ian McKenzie, and he came out with a great phrase, which was health before wealth, because we do have a responsibility. We are businesses, so there is a wealth aspect. The wealth is there, but we need to show the industry that we are that professional expert. So I'm going to go into those factors. Firstly, I'm going to look at joblessness. What is it actually looking like? What are people predicting? Because we do have the furlough scheme. And I am going to look at what the impacts of that. Now we know the finite dates, not only on when you'll be expected to contribute, but also what the drop dead dates and what that could mean to us in rental processing based on what we've already seen since when we went into lockdown on the 23rd of March. Then regarding that uncertainty, we've got the new phrase FOGO, fear of going out. But what does it actually mean? What are people thinking within the market? Where do we have the segments? There was a great story that was done, which I've actually pulled some of that information in so we can do an analysis. And then I'm going to do a quick poll just before we go into some of those to actually hopefully highlight, or not, could backfire completely on me. It's not previously, but actually to evidence where that uncertainty goes, because within our group where we operate, we're expected to know this information. So how much more will it be diluted when we go out into the general public? I then want to come on to looking at the arrears information, looking at not only size of arrears, number of arrears, but what it actually means. We've also got that broken down by regional variations. We're often being told throughout this COVID and our updates that different areas of the UK are experiencing it at different rates. Are we seeing that within our arrears profile? And where are we particularly able to track what that might look like in both the short and near future to see if we can predict what might happen with those tenant payment profiles? Lastly, what's next? I think that's where we come to that uncertainty. I certainly think within the property sector, that is also for us, what next? We've only this week already been hit with a further extension of 2 months on our eviction bans, but what does that mean? I often get a lot of agents that ring me up asking for advice or where they see that within the market. And I tell them the same, we cannot make the tenants suddenly have money. Neither can we force our landlords to accept arrangements. What we need to be is that credible expert providing the communication between the two parties. But to do that, we must be able to be confident that we're doing the right thing and that we're communicating it in the right way. And at the moment, I'm not sure that all of that information has been given to us to allow us to be that credible expert. We're often sat there asking the question why, particularly with the independent market, where it's, do we come back? I've spoken to so many agents that yes, we were allowed to open our offices, but it didn't mean we had a responsibility that just disappeared to our employees. And then lastly, I think an important question, and I'm going to monetize what that arrears position looks like in the UK and try and say what that could look out in a few various scenarios that run out for the rest of 2020. Historically, we've had a view within the industry that arrears has been a bad debt position, largely because it is typically an agent who has had the tenant move out. And so the likelihood of recovery reduced the more the length of time increased. But we've got a new arrears situation now within the UK, where people that don't have the facility to actually pay, but don't want to move. They've not made that decision and they're not getting into that bad debt. What can we do to assist here? How can we keep people informed? And more importantly, what do we do about our income? Within the industry, it has largely always been tied to the payment of rent. But actually, when you think of all the liabilities and all the legal things that we have to run through now, 90% of that is actually attached to work done irrespective of whether the rent is paid. So I do think there's questions that will need to be asked within the industry that won't change overnight as to how we actually answer this, should it prove to be a longer term effect. So I think firstly, onto that joblessness and the unemployment rate. And this, it goes back for some, maybe going back and they remember some of this. For others, we will have been in at the moment. But January to March before lockdown, our unemployment sat at 3.9%. It's at record levels in recent years for our unemployment. Unfortunately, the ONS is now predicting that over the course of 2020, they see that going to 10% due to the pandemic. That'll take it to levels not seen since the 90s. What will that actually mean to us? Not only, I think already people have started looking, what does that mean to us for our employees, for our workforce, for our availability of talent? Let's not forget that ROPA, while maybe paused during pandemic, will still be coming into our industry. There will be regulation that is still on the government agenda. So actually, good talent is still going to be important to retain to actually be able to provide those services. When we then think about what we're actually doing and what this means with unemployment and the reason that that's given us to that uncertainty, This then comes on to where we actually, this recent survey showed that there are 3 levels within the consumers. We've got the trusting, we've got the dissenting, and we've got the frustrated. And I know at various times I may move out. I think majority of the polls showed that we were all trusting during the initial part of the lockdown. And actually the government did a good job in explaining things and having a clear definitive line. I think differing views have happened since it's devolved and since that messaging has started to change. What hasn't changed and what we need to be aware of is if this is the consumer view, our clients are consumers. In the property sector, be it a tenant, I know a landlord is often referred to or taxed as if they are a business, but they are a consumer. Their emotional attachments to this transaction will be behaved as if they are a consumer. So who are we going to have in front of us? How do we cater for each of these views when we're actually dealing with them? How do we make sure at viewings, at inspections, for our contractors performing the work, that they all will fit in? And it's unlikely that they all involved in a transaction will be in the same. So to actually navigate that and to get that done properly, they're looking to us as the property professionals to navigate that for them. And really that's going to come down to where I said that responsibility. It is not just getting the economy back going again, although that was a big tick to be shown so early on in England that actually we needed to get this moving because it is so vital to the economy. But let's not underpin that. This is a responsibility that's been given. And for the first time, we can actually show how we can rise to that responsibility and that we were worth that trust. What I'm actually going to do is, before I go on to the next page, I'm going to quickly just start a poll. It's 2 quick questions. They're not trick questions. They are information that has been given out into the public, but I would just want you to actually answer the questions. So I think the first question has been launched now. Okay, I'll give it a few more seconds if anybody wants to be part of the group. 48, 53% voted. Okay, going to call it there on the votes. So I'm just going to call that on the question and share the results. So the winner there, as we have it, is it's the government at 56%. We've got a few thinking Westminster. Our next biggest jump is Public Health England. There's a number that feel it sits with Boris Johnson, then the chief medical officers, and then lastly, the Joint Biosecurity Centre. So actually, on that question, the reason it was multiple choices, there's 2 people involved. Actually, the testing of the 5 data points does sit with the Joint Biosecurity Centre. It is their responsibility to take all of that data and provide it into how the data points have actually performed within England. It is then the job of the chief medical officers within England to actually decide what alert level that we're on. So again, as you can see there, there's uncertainty even between us here, and we operate within this market. So when we're dealing with our consumers, we've got to expect that they will be dealing the same. I believe that the second question is not showing me that it's available, but the second question I was going to ask was going to be around what is the current level. Now I've ran this survey a few times. And again, we know we're not at 5 because we're not at lockdown. We know at 1, we're not at 1 because there's still restrictions. But where are we at 4, at 3, at 2? And I get a lot of people saying, I think we're at 4. I think we're at 3. I still get people who say, I think we're at 2. As it actually stands, we've never had a firm update since the 19th of May by Professor Whitty to say we're at stage 4. But since then, we've had lockdown easing. but it's not been firmly assessed that we're at stage 3 yet. And it's that movement that starts us then getting that uncertainty. And unfortunately, that uncertainty, as we're going to come to see, is part of what people go protection. And they put their arms around their assets because they don't know what may happen to them. And that affects us when we're thinking of rental payments and actually getting people to make what will probably be one of their biggest outlay and expenditures. So these are the different levels that we're actually dealing with. And that uncertainty over the levels is because there is so much ambiguity between them. If we now come on to the tenants in arrears, what can we actually see from the platform and what does it tell us? Now you'll see I've looked at 2. So I often, while we're able to look at the averages, I look at the median levels. The median is so that I can actually deal with it being the leveler for consistency. But whether I look at the average or I look at the median, the information shows me that it's climbing, and I can see quite a step change from what happened in March to my April and May picture. So what we're trying to track is what happened regarding the lockdown and did it affect. So this is our percentage of tenants in arrears. So this is calculated out of all of the rental invoices that you sent to tenants via the PayProp platform, and the ones that then paid. Of the remainder, what percentage did they make of your total tenants in arrears? And we can see that the median stayed pretty much static during the first 3 months of the year at around 6 to 6.4%, but then has jumped from 6 in January to 12% by the end of May. Now, what I wanted to also look at when I'm looking on there is this actually seasonal? So I wanted to make sure that we weren't seeing a trend at the beginning of the year regarding tenant payment profiles, particularly post-Christmas or the run up into the year end itself for the tax year, that we would have seen anyway. But actually, as we can see from this trend looking at 2019, it's not actually seasonal. And what we can actually see is that by the start of 2020, before lockdown even started, looking at the averages, the consumer debt position had already worsened, an extra 50% on the starting position to where we were in January 2019. Now, we already had a lot of stories telling us this in the campaign groups. So we knew that people's debt was growing. But then what I wanted to look is what it means in the actual size of arrears. So again, what we've tried to do here to try and level it out, because again, we often get people talking about in the Northeast means far different from London. So what we've done is we've calculated the arrears on an individual basis for each invoice per client to their rental average. So if it was a 400 average rent that you were actually having within one of our Northeast clients and your average arrears was 400, then to one of our London agents with an average rent of 3,000, who also had an average arrears of 3,000, it's a leveler. And unfortunately, what we can see is it's also still going up. So not only do we have more people owing us money, but actually on an individual basis, each of those people also owe us more. Now that's something that we would have seen in the step up from April to May because nothing changed. For people who were not on furlough or for people who had no income or in the gig economy, it's not as if they were suddenly out of lockdown and another source of income was provided to them. But again, we just wanted to make sure that actually what are we seeing and is it the right position? There are some good things that came out into the news that we need to be aware of, that while there are the elements that don't pay and that amount is going up, of the ones that were receiving, we had less expenses. We weren't going out for meals as often. We weren't actually spending money on our expenses. So actually our debt position as a country went down. Our borrowing typically goes up by about 7.6 billion, and it actually only went up by 3.8. So there's a story showing that actually as consumers, we were paying down our debt. If we look at it over the previous year, we can see again that worsening of the consumer debt position. It's not a comparative trend. So we can say 100% now on the arrears and on the amount, this is COVID, this is not seasonal. But what it can show us is that on the averages, it had gone from a starting position of 78.7 to 105.6. So that shows us already, before we even start to take the pandemic into play, we were already seeing factors, and we hear this about it becoming a larger proportion, rental increasing. It is a factor of the housing industry, often laid at the feet of estate agents. But as I've said, we are nothing other than that credible expert, and we need to provide that communication. What we also then are able to look at is that our debt balance, while they may have been paying it off, as agents, our debt balance is increasing. And when we come on to look at management fee loss, what does that actually mean to us? Because it's fine looking at this in arrears, and we often talk about what that means to our landlords, but we provide a service. We're an agent of. It's where our agent comes from, which means our income is linked. And I meant what I said before, within our industry, the majority of people have linked that to the receiving of funds. And if this plays out as some of these trends show us in later slides, we may need to look at what that means to us within our industry. We'll have a quick look globally. So we mentioned regarding joblessness and what could that mean going to 10%. We can already look a little bit over into the States. According to the Washington Post this week, they're already experiencing 13.3%. But actually, if we want to find the most closely aligned picture to us in both average management fee charged by agents and rental as a percentage of income, then that would be our South African territory. And as we can see, they also had it happen. However, when I come to look at it, they had the same lockdown date of the 23rd of March. They had a worsening arrears picture already than what we were experiencing within the UK. But when we come to look at what's happened to the actual processing numbers and management fee income, we'll actually see the difference of what happens when a lockdown happens with no government assistance. And that is why I then come on to talk about the furlough question. And have we got those dates in mind? And what are we doing to make sure that we're closely aligned on how that may impact our agencies? So if we look at the increase in arrears, we can kind of look at it another way, because that was looking at our platform as a whole. What I now wanted to do is actually look at our individual agencies and to see, is this something that we're seeing uniform across the whole of our market? On the left, where you can see the pie graph and the big dark color, it's actually showing that we had an 80% increase. That shows 4 in every 5 estate agencies on the platform saw an increase from March to April in their number of tenants that were in arrears, while over the same, only 11% saw a decrease. It says the same 9%, that is actually people who had 0 arrears in the majority of instances, and they remained with 0 arrears. Unfortunately, on the other side, when we look at the people who also experienced their increase as a percentage of their average rent, that also had a 54% increase. So almost half of our whole client portfolio saw an increase in both metrics. We've taken out some of the outliers. If you only sent 2 rental invoices and 1 was in arrears, and now you went up to 2, it would show as an increase. This doesn't actually put it in monetary terms. This is actually looking at volumes of invoices being sent and the debt that you have attached to those individuals and what that means as a percentage of your rental income. We will come to look at the monetary part of it, but it's important for us to know. And then when we look at April to May, what we've actually got there is an increase of 62% and an increase of 60. But I think if we look at the percentage tenants in arrears, this is where we see the 28% decrease. Now, when running these numbers, obviously the question was asked, why such a large decrease? And I think that's the uncertainty wraparound. A lot of people at the lockdown at the end of March were unsure what was going to happen to them. Furlough hadn't been announced. We got told there were measures that were going to affect and that would come out, that there would be self-employment relief, but nothing had actually materialized or how it was actually going to be played. So a lot of people decided, let's keep hold of that income. Let's wait and see what the picture looks like. Now, for some, that picture didn't improve, which is why we've had the continuing decreases. But for some, they were able to see we still have a job. We're still receiving 80% of our income, or up to 2,500. It helped smooth out the bump. But we still had 41% that were increasing in both metrics from April to May. So it was still a proportion of ours growing in the portfolio. And if we then look at that into buckets, so rather than looking at just the percentages, what I wanted to see is, let's break that down. Now, at the bottom, where we had those that had 0 arrears, that has gone from 14.9 to 6.6. So it really has proven that even the people that were trying to run their portfolios correctly and run with 0 arrears, and I have lots of people that came to use PayProp for its efficiencies and to help them maintain their arrears balance, they're now finding that situations outside of their control are growing that arrears position. What we can also see, and probably the one I most want to focus on, is while we can see the bottom two shrinking, it is that 10 to 20%. That's the point when it becomes meaningful. And that has actually gone from 20.4 to 35.7. Now, I know at the top it's gone from 1.1 to 3, which I point out, almost trebling the amount of agents that actually experience more than 50% of their tenant balance. But actually, that's still a small percentage of the number of agents on the platform. Actually, this 10 to 20% is where it starts to become meaningful. If we think of the impact of what happened when the tenant fee ban came in, and it was predicted that it was somewhere between 10 and 23% with a 19% average income loss, to start having that happen through our arrears position and not being suddenly receiving that management fee income, that accrual of that management fee starts to become an important question. If we then look at that in the same way regarding the amount that was owed, unfortunately, the picture shows the same trend. The people who owed less than 75%, where it was smaller arrears, has started to shrink. And unfortunately, those that own more than 150%, we've actually seen that grow by a third. So we've actually had a 33% increase over this period of time in people owing more than 1.5 months rent. And that obviously becomes a huge question when we now cannot do anything and no evictions being picked up until the end of August. What is expected of us? What are our landlords going to do? It's all going to come down to that communication and showing that we're actually looking after both parties. That trust has really meant we need to look after this. So then we looked at it via regions. And when we came to look at it at regions, there's some that jump out. So all regions had a higher percentage than May 2020 to May 2019. And this is where we come to that worsening of the position that we've already experienced. As you can see in Scotland, we actually had one of the smallest variations between the years. And it jumps out that the Northeast actually sits there at 26.4. However, we shouldn't hide away that there are some other important numbers to look in there. London grew from 5.1 to 15.3. We've got a 3 times increase that's actually gone on. We've got the same within the East Midlands, 4.1 to 15.8. So we're actually seeing right the way across the UK, not just through the pandemic, but actually already our starting point was worse. It was already a question that we should, have an industry, have been asking about what we do with the arrears position. Something that I've seen when things like the Section 21 question comes up and its removal, people worrying because of the worsening position that they've already seen over time happening to their portfolio. It's not any different a picture when we start looking at those amounts, except if we remember where Scotland only had a small increase in relevant rent sizes, that has now gone from 51 to 145. But the East Midlands still stands out with an average 172% of the rental as their average arrears across the portfolio. So again, on here, it's all showing that they're on the way up. But what does it mean money-wise? Now, I had to look at some averages when I was dealing with this. So what I wanted to do first was have a look at what actually got processed through the platform and what have we seen actually happen in monetary terms. And that is where I then start looking at, I obviously can't break that down into the money received or what a single agent has done. So what we did is we took the end of March, although that was 1 week of lockdown, we took that as our starting position of what was actually being processed through the platform for all of our agents like yourselves. And then we said, what happened in April, what happened in May? Because people were unable to move. We were unable to evict people. We were able to, in most instances, we were unable to move people in. So actually, this was a static point to actually look at those. And as you can see, over the 2 months, we've actually seen a 10% loss in actual transactions in monetary terms that has come through. Now, I can actually, with the information, we can break that down into what that actually meant in physical processing through the platform. We've then been able to apply that to the platform for management fee loss. And I'm going to come on to show that. But what I wanted to say is the trend is a worry. It hasn't leveled out yet. And unfortunately, there are a couple of factors which we've already indicated towards. Whereas an agency, have you asked the correct questions? I know a lot of people have said to me that they're looking at their own staff and what needs to get put back. But what will August mean? At the time when employers have to start contributing, they will more likely to see that actually furloughing will be reduced, because now I have to contribute. Now I make the first decision as to whether that employee is going to come back. And if they're not going to come back, do I now, for the next 3 months until furloughing stops, want to contribute to give this person a static income? For a lot of people with the current economic outlook, they're not going to want to make that decision. So in August, we could start seeing another drop off with people unable to have their income and with furlough being removed. We then predict that the biggest impact of that will be when it comes to a complete shutdown in October, which is then our run into Christmas. So already we're then going to have people doing that same protect around what assets that they've got running into November and December. And this was without looking as to whether some of the updates are telling us as to whether we have another lockdown. I know there was a recent report on a state of the market done by another prop tech company earlier this week, and they were looking at 4 scenarios. And a lot of those scenarios were what happens if the COVID crisis comes back and we end up back in lockdown. These are things we can already see on the horizon without another lockdown. Another lockdown does mean we need to look at all of our processes. So what did it mean in South Africa? Because it was more closely aligned, but as I said, they went in on the 23rd of March, but with no government assistance. Now what they can see is they had a 25% loss almost instantly. With no government assistance, people who were unable to work lost their jobs, lost their income. So we can extrapolate from that. Could that be our smoothing that's been done by the furlough? Are we looking at a 25% loss? If we have a 25% loss, what would that mean to us if that is our trend? What we're going to say is that further data is required. It's not very evident, but in April to May, there was a slight recline. It was only 1.1%, but actually not only did it level off, but a little bit more was received. Less of that protection because more people were hit with the instant impact. But it's going to need further data required. So what we're actually going to do as part of this document that we're going to provide and give you this under the resources, what we're actually going to do is keep a notice of this for the following quarters. Look at June, July, and August and provide a report in September. Look at September, October, November, and give a report back in December. Keeping our PayProp users apprised as to what we can see. And the more data we get, the more we can hopefully try and tell you regarding the dates, what are the potential points that we should be looking for, or the seasonality that could impact your tenant's ability to pay. If we then come on to money and what that actually means for us in monetary terms, this is where we start looking at the management fees. And again, although we have the average, I'm going to focus on the median, only because we do have some enterprise clients within the PayProp platform, which typically in monetary terms carry a higher value of arrears just because of the size of the portfolio. Whereas the median helps us get rid of that and again, look at the consistency. But if I take that and I take where the arrears sat as an average, I've also looked at this being an average 10% arrears. So I know some of you are going to be thinking 10%. I wish I could get my landlords to pay 10%. I know others within ours will be saying, why only 10%? I'm not doing my work only for that. It varies not only up and down the UK, but also within each locale. But I had to take a point somewhere, and 10% is often still discussed as the national average. Removing the taxman, because we're not talking about any money he receives. So that meant that at the start of the year, if I take it up to March, which we had at that starting point, our lost fee income was already a £6,000 question. If that was to run as that is our scenario, that was how the debt position had got worse up until lockdown. That's where we were looking at this, whether it was a bad debt, and we were looking at it as £6,000 question. That has already now increased to an 894, it looking more like a £10,500 question, slightly over. So we've had a £377 increase just from March to May, actually monetizing that increase in arrears across the portfolio. So is this bad debt? If we've got people sat in, we're being campaigned by people to write off this arrears, that our landlord should take it as a hit, that the fat cat shouldn't earn any more. I was pleased to see a story actually shedding light that for a large proportion, there is a lost element of our landlords. Yes, there are the buy-to-lets. There are the people who can actually get a payment holiday. A payment holiday is not a never, never. It still has to be paid back. It's not, as the campaign groups have asked, for a complete rental holiday. But there's also an element where this is their pension. They don't have a mortgage to rely on. This is their income, and their income has been removed without that assistance. So it will need to be paid back. But what arrangements are we putting in place? How are you doing that? How do you reflect that within the system? I know we've had a number of our users that have said, how do I show that position? How do I claim it? So actually you can put a record. You can actually show the adjustment of where their positioning stands and load a separate rule to recover the arrears position. Make sure that in any agreements it's done in writing. It can even be attached to the invoice rule, that in writing agreement, that should it fall, this agreement is null and void, the full amount is left owing. Because it might have changed that we cannot do evictions, but we still have to follow the same procedure. We still have to follow the instructions of our landlords, and we still want to get things. Obviously, we've got to do our notice now for 3 months, not 2 months, and that runs up until the end of September. But if we're following that procedure, we need to follow it. Now, also, as PayProp users, you've got access to Agent Smart. And very kindly, there has been an offer placed out to our PayProp users where you're able to use those services and test it during this period of time to see if they can assist. And I would definitely encourage you to reach out, because somebody getting involved, and again, shows us to the landlords that we're using that credible expert. Yes, we know the legislation. Yes, we can help you manage our properties, but we don't go in and be your electrician, because we use the expert for that market. When you're dealing with this arrears, if we don't want it to be a bad debt, we should treat it the same. And we should treat it as it is now, if at that 894 is close to an £11,000 question. And if we've got that, and this position could be worsening over time, why would we not bring in an expert who has a track record to actually help us manage this arrears balance? So if anybody needs those contact details or hasn't got it through the platform, please just reach out, have my contact details, or raise it as a support question. We'd be more than happy to get you in contact with Agent Smart to actually see if there's anything that they can, even just through a consultation process, help you in your arrears and your communication with your tenants and landlords. They are also working with people up and down the country, so they have a great insight into what has been working. Often our landlords are coming to us and saying, please help me. I don't want to get rid of the tenant, but neither can I live on zero income. So what has been tried? What has worked? What communication has got the tenant engaging with us? Because that is often the hardest part. Yes, we're an agent, but we're the communicator. And sometimes when they're in arrears, a lot of people may choose to bury their head in the sand. But with the right communication, we can get them back communicated. And if they're back communicating, we can often find a solution. We need to make sure that you've asked the furlough question. What does that mean to you? Not just with your employees, but what does it mean? Are your landlords aware that this furlough question still could come up? Are they aware that these are on the horizon to help them try and smooth out? What can we assist with them? What can we help with communication? Already heading it off. Should you find yourself in a position, please speak to us. We are here to assist. If we head that off before, people are more likely to speak to us at the time of crisis. If they feel we're just chasing them because of that bad debt question, then they are more likely to be a protection and just cover around their assets. What we want them to do is see us as somebody who can actually help them. To do that, we should also know that if somebody is in financial difficulty, where do we signpost them? Just being there on behalf of the landlord is not that full service. It's not answering that responsibility question. So to say that, also answer you the question, what would 25% mean to me as an agent? What would it mean if I had to carry that? Then if we take this scenario, and if we actually take what we're experiencing within the market, and I take where we are currently at, and I 2.5 times that 377 increase, now it becomes a close to an £18,000 bad debt question. And at that point, if I'm an agency sat there with an £18,000 income loss question, now I want an expert. Now I want an answer. I must bring that in. That is as important to our industry as dealing with the tenant fee ban. Unfortunately, we were given years to prepare and lots of people lobbying. What we're having to learn here is to deal with this as the situation presents us. And we've got to make sure that both ourselves, our employees, our negotiators, our inventories, our viewings, the contractors that we send to do the works, that all of them view us as that expert. Because that's where ROPA has been coming. That's where the legislation has been put in. That's where this sector needs to go. But to do that, we now need to show that we've been given this opportunity and we're right to do it. Now, I've actually spoken to a few PayProp clients and asked them how they're actually dealing with this. I've spoken to some of our clients in the north of England, and I've also spoken to some in the south. I've spoken directly in London, because actually a lot of people are told it's often different. And actually, yes, it has affected them in different ways. But actually, they're all answering the same question. The idea hasn't changed. People still need a property. They still need a roof over their head. The pandemic hasn't solved our housing crisis. There are not more houses being built here than there were before. We're often asking the question, will there be an adjustment? But there hasn't been an adjustment yet. We've got to prepare for what this may mean, but we've also got to work with the information at hand. So in the north of England, a customer that I was dealing with, who's been with PayProp for a long length of time, they're actually looking at what does it mean to have an office? What does it mean to allow people? I saw a great post that was done today, which actually showed working from the office, working from home, or both, and actually had it with the heart of working on both. But what does that mean? We've often fought the question over becoming an online agent, that we are in a people business. And I think being given this trust has shown how much we're in the people side of the business. But what does it now mean to have that location? What does it need to look like? Will we have people coming in? How does it work for social distancing? I know from having traveled around the country and gone to most estate agencies, because they need to be on that front store, that because it's been the front of a house, actually they've gone back. And the idea through some of those corridors to maintain social distancing has become a nightmare for a lot of the clients that are talking to me. But it's asking them to ask the question, do I need that location? Or more importantly, who do I need at that location? We need to make sure that we're dealing with this within the industry. And then let's allow this to have a look at the amount of people that have stepped up their virtual viewings, the acceptance of it by both people who are buying and people who are renting to view it. That when they go around to the property, we've got them actually already starting to ask the questions around the assistance that we can provide. I think one thing, speaking to people all around the UK, is that this sense of vulnerability is not going to disappear overnight. It is going to be with us for some time. And the rental market, while it may have bounced back, sales, as we saw in 2008, typically takes longer. So what do we do to ride through that? Because whether ROPA comes in or anything, we still need a professional estate agency market at the end of it. That is not going to change. The call for that will never change. Landlords still need help in navigating all the legislation that's open to us. That's not going to change. So have we gone through our processes? I know everybody's printed off, or most people I speak to have printed off the COVID help and what it needs to be. I've even seen people who've opened the offices and got a COVID checklist now up on the wall alongside their fees and their CMP certificates and everything else. But actually we need to go a step further. We need to start asking all of these questions about what it means, not just to us and ticking the boxes, but how do we make this work smoothly for all the people involved? Because that's what they expect of us, for us to have those answers. And I think more than ever, if we answer that, we're showing we're that property agent, that specialist, that credible expert that we were shown that trust on the 12th of May. Now, I'm open for any questions that anybody wishes to pose. If anybody has any questions on this forum, you can submit them via your support page directly via the platform. But actually, this information shows that not only asking me questions, it's the time for us to ask questions of our industry. It's time for us to look at our processes and procedures. Luckily, already being on PayProp, we were able to continue our payments. And I've dealt with a number of people within your industry that have now made that transition because they wish they'd have had something. But what about your other processes? Have you applied that same methodology? So actually, I've just had a question posted up by Liz, which is actually saying, can I provide the email address? I will provide the email address. Email address is liz@agentsmart. So I probably don't need to answer. I could say it's liz@agent-smart.co.uk. It has been communicated to you, but please feel free to reach out if you need any assistance. Our support can also direct you directly to liz@agentsmart. And actually their questions, their letters, their templates, their processes have already been proven to assist some of our PayProp clients. So with the offer that they've got in a moment, I would definitely encourage you to reach out. It can help us navigate this and also prepare for when those furloughing questions happen. So if there are no other questions coming through on the Q&A, then I'm happy to bring this to a close. Please do go and read your report on your resources. I'll also have this if you feel anybody else in the business, because the question is not just the business owners who are largely who come here. We should be encouraging everybody, from our finance administrators, our negotiators, our lettings, our property managers. How do we make this better for our consumers involved? How do we answer the uncertainty that they've got at the moment? Because that is the time that we'll go out and we will not only protect what we've got, but there will be people leaving this industry at the moment. And they're looking for that credible expert to go and put their property with. And as PayProp customers, and we know our scalability, we are perfectly placed to take that on board, so long as we can show that we've got the answers. Thank you very much for your time in coming through to this webinar. And I look forward to speaking to you all, and happy using PayProp. Powered by PayProp, definitely the way forward. Thank you for your time.